Hi, everyone. It's me, Dr. Goins, going live today on Thursday with my monthly webinar, Connection Over Control, exploring the real reason why your classroom relationships aren't working. So thanks for joining me today. I am just kind of building my online portfolio to showcase my research and just my practice. I literally just came out of the classroom. My micro school is Heartwise Scholars, and I opened in August at my home. I live on 5 acres. We have a very long ranch and a spot in the middle of my home, which is excluded from all of my living spaces on either side. And we've opened 2 classrooms, a pre-K Montessori classroom and a K-5. And so we were rolling so well. And due to compliance for us to have more students, I don't have to be licensed in Virginia, but I qualify to operate under an exemption as long as I serve K-5 students on a permitted building for a learning center. So we have just opened our learning center literally this week, and I am currently a micro school owner of 2 separate locations because yes, we still operate our preschool and now we are expanding K-5. I started with 6 learners. Now I have 8 in person and 2 online with a growing list of scholars joining us. And so I'm really excited about that. But if my daughter says, "You're going on a webinar looking like that," but that's kind of who I want to be. So I am in the thick of it. I'm a researcher. I finished my doctoral degree, educational leadership, literally last May. And so I was inspired by my research to start this micro school because I believe in relationship-based classroom management. And so on Thursdays, once a month, I get to share with you a little piece of my heart. Sometimes it's cool to be smart. So let's go ahead and get on with it. Okay, again, I told you a little bit about me. Relationship-based edupreneur. I actually have 3 businesses. So my micro school is off of my research, but I had wrote the book When Relationships Matter, a social emotional approach to teaching and learning while I was teaching in the public schools and mothering my kids. So I am the Resilient Teacher Mom. That's my first business and brand. I'm a writer. And then the next thing is Teachers as Partners, which is sponsoring this webinar. I love relationships and plan to change the world with relationship-based classroom management. My last business is for my family and other families like me, working homeschool families who want to be whole but have whole children as well. So that's Heartwise Scholars. Okay, so the significance of this webinar, the significance of connections in the world that seem to be in a world that seems to be too busy to recognize the obvious, but connections play a big part in the relevance of our world. Okay, have you ever been in a room where the Wi-Fi is out? So you can talk about electricity, you can talk about internet, you can talk about relationships, you can even talk about finding the right service provider or the right place to eat by the connections you have. And so connections play kind of a part in the livelihood, like a quality of life per se. Because yes, you can live your life out in this world without connections, but how fruitful and how joyful it is to be determined. Really, joy and anything good doesn't really come out of a place that doesn't have connections. And sadly, in a lot of the classrooms nowadays, based off of productivity and tasks and just a list of expectations in terms of someone saying that's what it needs to be to educate a child. It's not always respecting the connections that kids are kind of growing into learning about this world. And so connections look different, especially in 2025, but in 21st century in general. Connections kind of, really dictate everything in the world. And so in a world that was, especially in America, that was brought off by oral traditions and laws, it sometimes it recycles over time and it's not relevant to who it serves. And so I believe connections play a bigger role than it played before. And my research was inspired because of my relationship based management approach. I knew it worked from experience, but it's hard as a mother of five, a Filipina American, and a lot of my profession too, were women, kind of overworked, um, and I was married, but I I am still married, and sometimes I respected my family over the job, which was hard to manage at times, especially when the workload was so high. So, here's our objectives tonight. We're going to explore the research behind two motivational theories. It's social cognitive motivational theory and social cultural motivational theory. Those are the motivational theories that put connection back in the mix of 21st century education. Then we're going to explore the research behind self-efficacy, because a lot of people like to think of the masses and the group, but they don't really think about the individual. And how you think about the individual will determine how you interpret the disruptions or how they express themselves in the group. Then the last thing I'm going to kind of introduce is go into different methods of classroom management and different styles that every educator gives into. You're one or the other. And so it's important for you to understand where you fall in line of the continuum. And then I'll introduce how relationship based classroom management, or how I fit into the continuum. And that research has freed me up to be very confident in running my micro school. And so I am in the business of building relationships and building class communities and with little fluff. And so this research allows me to show up, and I can talk you through about my relationship-based classroom management approach. Okay, social cognitive motivational theory. This is kind of my diagram. What you have to know is these black highlights here is that every individual has a social influence. That's what, it says. But then it also says that, but cognitive thinking is super important because that social influence affects the way the whole group thinks of themselves, but also how they think of themselves. And then on top of that, the things that mold that social influence a lot of the times is the learning environment. Even though it's faint, it's always there. The other people in the room, and also the goals that they have set in the room and for themselves. Now, where do you see social cognitive motivation theory moving into our community? You would be surprised. You see it everywhere except for education. And so sometimes I find education is a little behind the times, which is a little sad, but I mean, it is everywhere. The cows with the chicken sign, to influencers on YouTube, to Facebook, to Nike, to Spotify and podcasts, and especially in sports. But everyone on there, exercises the right and acknowledges their social influence. They, know their social influence can affect how they think of themselves and how they, other people think of them. And then the last one, everything is about goal setting now. So the goals that a community gives into, I want to try to find my like-minded people. It means you guys share the same goals and interests. And the other thing is every individual who has strong goals as well, they are constantly thinking about that. So they become, part of this social cognitive or motivational theory. So then there's another theory that we give into in terms of relationship-based classroom management, why this kind of holds its own. Motivation, when you think of motivation, you don't really think of intrinsic motivation, but both these theories, because they're affected by being in community with others that relationship is the gift and the motivation. And a social cultural motivational theory means that they acculturate basically the group. They have different cultures and they bring together. They learn from each other's different cultures, and that culture from everybody else, breeds this, like, I don't know, like a fusion of a culture together. And so it has to do a lot with respecting an individual's identity, actually, the group, how they are together. I think Breakfast Club becomes their identity because they're like the Breakfast Club, but they have strong individuals. But because they respect each other and they do life together, or they've built this common bond by being different and listening to each other's stories. That's why the speech bubbles are here, because that's very verbally persuaded. Then they are social culturally motivated, which means that they know enough about each other where they influence each other through their own individual cultures, and they start sharing the same traditions and beliefs. And so it has a lot to do with their identity. Okay, so where do you see social cultural theory in our community? Well, let's take a look. In the movies. Oh my goodness. Again, education. Let's get with the times. I mean, the movies has been doing this for a year, where it's more about interpersonal connection, those inner stories, those connections that you make with other people. A lot of different characters coming together for good, a lot of different groups kind of finding themselves, and accomplishing a goal. All of that is literally a picture of social cultural theory. So I want to ask you, so how has social cognitive motivation and social cultural motivation changed your view of being social in the classroom? Well, I hope it's, proven to you that it's actually more complex than throwing a party for kids in a room, or getting a group of kids together and they're playing together. Just because they're in a room together, doing activity together, doesn't mean necessarily they are social. And then the other thing that it proves too, because you talk about like strong personalities or strong behaviors in the room, and you think if you remove that child, or if that, you ignore that child, that's not going to affect your community. But an opposite, if that child is constantly removed, and he does not understand his social influence, doesn't have a good viewpoint of his social influence, and he doesn't have good thinking of his peers and how they think of him, it could be hard for that kid to integrate, and vice versa. That child may, the group may feel like they're being punished a little bit because they don't understand a child, and so they may interpret things a little bit different. So it matters that every child and everyone matters in the room, and that's because of the social cognitive and social cultural motivational theory that goes behind the kid wanting to be there. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about why that would benefit you guys in the future. And that's because it just creates this like community where you can be trustworthy and kids feel secure and safe. And that relationship building can happen, but on a deeper level. So let's talk about the individual in terms of self-efficacy. So self-efficacy, and its impact on how a teacher manages disruptive behavior. Well, I kind of made this illustration here, but self-efficacy is a person's belief in his or her abilities to accomplish a task or a goal. And you wouldn't think, let's face it, like I just finished my 4th day, which is my last day in the school week, at a new location, with it. I had 6 that I've always taught, 2 new to us. But if you're in education, you know that when you have new students mixed with other new students, it only takes 1 to kind of start a little fresh all over again. But this has been pivotal for me to integrate my new 2 with the 6, is knowing self-efficacy. So I know what they're aiming for. I know their goals. And what they're showing me in these 4 days is whether they believe they can reach those goals and they believe they have the abilities to accomplish the task and do things. And I can't tell you how many disruptive students I've had in the past whose issue was how they viewed themselves more than anything else. And the more they've been through daycares and like classrooms and teachers and caregivers, that made them feel, that never changed how they felt about themselves, the more jaded and cold and um, just kind of angry they were by the time they got to me. But because I understood that they just didn't understand or believe in themselves, it's changed everything on how I respond to them. But self-efficacy is crucial because in a group, if there's anyone that's insecure, you can even talk about any group, any close community where one person, one of your teammates, even if you're talking on a sports team, feels insecure about their abilities, it weakens the whole team. And so it's important when you're in a very social cognitive and social cultural motivating environment that the individual self-efficacy is always at the top of your list. Like I am heightenedly aware of their goals and how they feel towards those goals. And I'm always backstepping with them about, okay, I'll give you an example. My one of my new ones today, I realize when he feels offended, he may do something silly, or if he doesn't want to do something, he'll kind of just leave the activity. And he's working on a team, but he's very dependent on his other teammates. And so I asked him because his other teammates had decided to do something else. And so the time we call is Ohana time. And Ohana time is time where they choose something to do, like a project like a passion project they choose for themselves. But he had never, it's always attached to a video game or it's always attached to somebody else's passion project, but he had never explored his own abilities, but you could tell he didn't really believe in them. And so I end up coaching him up probably for about 5 or 6 minutes, just about asking him questions and stuff. And I said, well, what if there's anything in the room right now? And I explained to him as, right now, these days are for you to kind of self-discover their purpose-driven, passion-driven times during the day. And for you to be a team player, that's fine. But it's also important for you to understand how to plan, start, and finish an activity just so that you're in it, for the long haul when you're with a teammate. And you know how to pivot if that teammate is not there or needs to leave. And so I challenged him to pick out of like 6 stem bends, something he could start. And I had waited on it like for 7 minutes, knowing that self-efficacy was going to be the first step. I was going to have to give him some, self-efficacy experiences for him to feel okay when he's not okay, that he doesn't think he's doing well. And so he did it. He did it. And he made like a little marble run. And at first it was unstable. And he showed me, I challenged him to fix the unstable part, and he did it. And then he was so proud. We sent his mom a little video. So, but self-efficacy is really important. And the goals that I have in the classroom, I challenge you to kind of see what goals show up for you. And I'm very much a personalized option. My option is very personalized. And so they all have academic, partnership, and personal goals. But I always try to work in things that build self-efficacy. Self-efficacy. So a strong self-efficacy means that they consider problems and obstacles as challenges to overcome rather than threats to avoid. A strong self-efficacy will most likely they'll try more difficult material and keep working until they master the content. A strong self-efficacy means that they tend to develop a deeper interest in learning and persevering. And a strong self-efficacy means that they view negative feedback constructively and quickly recovers from setback. A weak self-efficacy behavior means that they tend to avoid challenging tasks out of fear of failure. Another weak self-efficacy behavior is often they believe that challenging task materials are beyond their capabilities. Another weak self-efficacy task is that they may focus on their personal shortcomings rather than constructive ways to overcome challenges. And the last one is they may take constructive feedback negatively and give up more easily and lose confidence when encountering setbacks. So here are the things when I keep in mind that I know only increase self-efficacy. And this is from Bandura, and he had said there are 4 types of sources of self-efficacy. They need to have mastery experiences, so they need to have little successful tasks. That's why I coached him up to plan, start, and finish a project by himself so he knew what that felt like. Vicarious experiences, they need to see that other people have, just like him, have failed before but been successful. Social persuasions. Talk, 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 talk. They need to be verbally encouraged a lot of the time. So I call my pod youthfully yacky. Youthfully yappy. And that's because we're constantly communicating and talking to each other, but that's because we socially persuade each other. And then psychological state. They need to be able to handle stress and emotions and have coping mechanisms to kind of intervene with it. So it is in my research where it says that teacher job satisfaction and with discipline and behavior. If there's high self-efficacy, they actually have high job satisfaction. If there's low self-efficacy, they have low job satisfaction. And it says that teacher autonomy also, so if the teacher gets to choose how they intervene with behaviors, it also increases job satisfaction. So the last 2 parts of my webinar is this. Objective number 3 is that we're going to discuss the 3 different classroom management styles teachers give into. And this blew my mind when I found this in the research. It's really hard to find research on classroom management, but I found this study from Australia where it named 3 different types of classroom management theories. And so one is an interventionist, which is very typical in many traditional options. That means they believe that they have high control, and this is a teacher. A teacher believes they have high control and power as an adult over student behaviors. They can relate it to rules, rewards, and punishments. So a teacher thinks that it's me and how I give my rules. It's me, how I do my rewards. It's me on how I do my punishments or consequences that control that student's behavior. An interactionalist, on the other hand, believes they only have a moderate control and power as an adult over student behaviors, and they make more of an emphasis on social impact of the individual and the environment. And this one is like, okay, I can control some of that, but I can't control all of it. But the best I can do is kind of hone in on their social influence and change up my environment to kind of work towards those goals. And the last one, a classroom management style where they believe that they have no control or power over their students' behaviors, and students are empowered to explore and manage behavior on their own. That's called a non-interventionalist. So that's completely hands-on, like hands-off, sorry. They believe that they shouldn't be doing anything at all because a kid is able to handle life on their own. So the one that I favor, should be obvious if it wasn't before, is the interactionalist. So I am very much an interactionalist, and this is why I'm an interactionalist, is because I manage my classroom through this framework called PART. And so in my research, I realized I was in a 3rd grade classroom where I made this acronym up. The class had been left in kindergarten and 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, one of the students in that class, she had found me on Facebook and messaged me and said I was her favorite teacher. But I observed that class, and it had been left because there were serious interpersonal problems. They had organization issues. They were interpersonally like hostile towards each other, and there was no learning being done. So I grew up in a big family where it was very structured and organized, and I am kind of a creative and said, well, I'm going to teach them how to do their part, and we're going to be partners of teaching and learning. And then, you know, how many years later? That was 2009. 16 years later, here am I on this webinar after I wrote a book and did research and did PDs on this. So my acronym goes like this. You have to be prepped and ready. You have to have attitude awareness. You have to be respectful and responsible. And you have to have teamwork. It is both. Now I understand through my research, it is both a cognitive process, so this isn't a program. It literally is like a cognitive process, but you can also use it as a value-based set of expectations. And so it goes like this. If you use it as a value-based set of expectation, the rule number one is that you've got to be prepped and ready, which means you've got to be organized and be able to self-manage your stuff, self-manage your emotions, self-manage your area, all the things. But then rule number two is that you have to have attitude awareness, because honestly, if you have self-management problems or self-awareness problems, it probably shows up with a bad attitude first. And so you need to have emotional regulation and self-control. Rule number three is respect and responsibility. And that just means that is the conduct code of any relationship between peer and peer or teacher student. And that just means kindness and empathy, actions, accountability, and assertiveness. Now, rule number four is teamwork. Teamwork means that it implied that we don't just care about an individual or a few individuals. We work together as a team. So that implies collaboration, communication, and cooperation. Like I said, it's a cognitive process. So you have to start with one. So a child who struggles being prepped and ready, needs to work on these sort of mastery experiences before they work on attitude awareness, just because they don't have the mastery experiences to have the type of self-efficacy to believe that they can learn. So self-efficacy or master experiences will have to be along the lines of organizing and using materials, participating in procedures and routines, and being on a schedule. Time management is definitely a skill. And then you can move into attitude awareness. And so when you go into attitude awareness, you're going to be more aware of your emotions. You're going to be aware of your body sensations, so how your emotions show up, physically in your body. And you're going to normalize self-reflection and self-assessment. You need to kind of get to know yourself. And that breeds attitude awareness, because if you know it, it also breeds them communicating. So when I say being more aware, awareness brings on better communication skills, because that's part of what I do. Like 80% of my day is just coach kids through questions and asking the right questions so that they can build their awareness, so they communicate what's going on. The more they communicate with me, the more they communicate with themselves. And then it helps with the awareness and the management piece. After they have attitude awareness, they can go right into respect and responsibility, which means they're more mindful of their actions towards themselves, others, and the environment. And they're also more mindful of their words towards self, others, and the environment. So that's how they operate actively as being respectful and responsible. And after they get in a rhythm of that, naturally it lends for teamwork. They share and care for one another within a community, and they work towards shared goals and expectations. So how does PART connect with social motivation, teacher self-efficacy, and interactional style of classroom management? I hope you know that answer. But so PART helps me to think, about all of the pieces that have to do with the individual and the community. And because my focus is the individual within the community, it naturally kind of sits in the nest of social cultural and social cognitive motivational theory. Because to me, the relationships are the gift. I have no incentives or rewards, I have no punishments. And so when you eliminate those control factors, well, then how do you operate? I have to be very sensitive to social cultural and social cognitive motivational theory to understand how relationships work. And the way I manage that sort of sensitivity is through my cognitive framework of PART. And so, because I can acutely and sharply have a cognitive framework that I think through in times of when I am in relationship with my students, then I naturally give in more confidently to being an interactionist. Yes, there are some things I can control, and we have conversations about that. I put systems in place with that. I teach, rules and expectations with it. But other than that, they have free will and they make choices on their own. And sometimes it does not serve me well. It does not serve their peers well. But I also, to piggyback off of that, teach them about restorative practices. And I verbally persuade them a lot about how that affects them and how it affects the team. And using those conversation skills to conflict resolute, bringing it back to the individual and the team again gives into social cultural and social motivational theory. So that lends towards the interactionalist method. I change the learning environment towards the goals, like all of my options in classrooms are very functional, but functional with a purpose. And I will use my learning environment to communicate certain things that I don't have to, you know, repeat constantly every day. I make sure my spaces communicate things that I don't have to say out loud. And I make sure I protect my learning environment so that all can feel included. So I'm ending my webinar here with you. Again, I am Dr. Goins. I live and breathe relationship-based classroom management. And since I hope today I just gave you something to think about in terms of, connection over control. So take your time today to self-reflect on your journey with classroom management. Which style do you lend to? Where are you with social motivational theory? And have you considered self-efficacy? And when you do consider self-efficacy for yourself or your student, how does that change things? So connection over control. So I hope that gave you the real reason why your classroom relationships aren't working, because connections, are not the focus. And when connections aren't the focus, then, the social aspects that are kind of running your room, you're just not aware of or notice. So I hope that helps you with everything. This is me. I am Dr. Goins. That little writing right there on my name right there. But I represent my consultant business is Teachers as Partners. We just hope to revolutionize education. It doesn't matter what option you are, through relationships. I did this in the public school. My kids were private school, but we operate like this as a family. We even do a relationship-based ministry when we're not in education. And it works in my micro school, which has been very, very beautiful. So the services I offer is small group coaching, professional development, and motivational speaking. And so if that's something you're interested in, please let me know. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great night. Bye.